Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tin and Max. I'm Max, and that guy is Tin.
Yes, that is me. I am Tin.
I am Tin. that sounds like a cool
Today
game that
I
should come
am
out
Tin.
where you're a garbage can. It's the I Am Bread sequel.
There is a sequel to I Am Bread where you're a fish.
Really? This
Yeah, same
sequel?
people. I'm pretty sure.
Wow. Wow. Well, we got something really important to talk about today. What is that, Tin?
I am fish. No, I'm just
No,
kidding.
it's not.
Remakes. Video game remakes. Why are they a thing? Should they be a thing? Are they good? Are they a good thing? And so on and so forth.
Indeed. Indeed. With the whole new Last of Us being announced, we figured this would be a good topic, and especially as Tin talked about in a previous video with Dead Space remakes, we thought this would be a fun subject to talk about. And if you haven't watched the Dead Space remake video, go watch it
Do it.
now,
Do it right now.
right this second.
Right this absolute second. So I put together a list of questions to kind of lead the discussion that I think are fair and are good things that need to be brought up in regards to this. The very first one, of course, being, are remakes needed? Thoughts, Max?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good question because remakes, I think, are needed depending. And I think a couple of the next couple questions answer this, but remakes are something that can be incredible if especially if the game is old enough. So if the game has really terrible graphics, really you can't go back to play it, but it still has a place in your heart because we all grew up playing video games. And so there are certain games that would be great as remakes to come out with it. Now, the sad thing is it feels like video game developers have gone away from having new creative ideas and have just decided to do only remakes, and that's where it's becoming a problem. Once we were doing video games that were nostalgic and bringing them back, and it was just so great. But then that caught on so much that video game developers said, "Hey, we don't need to create anything new. Let's just keep building on stuff we already have." So I think remakes
Honestly,
are needed, but I think it needs to be with a certain threshold of how long ago the game originally came out.
yeah. That's exactly one of the questions, too. And I think what you're saying about nostalgia, like in companies feeding on that, I think that's just a big thing in entertainment, period. Like Disney's remaking all their classic animated movies, but live action for some reason. It's a similar thing. Those like that's like those movie reboots or remakes or whatever are literally the equivalent of these game remakes. And honestly, it's just kind of it's not that surprising that this is a thing. It's not even that old of a thing if we're being honest.
Sure,
They've been
but
doing it for years.
I think that to your point though, the difference between the entertainment industry coming out with like sequels versus remakes is sequels are still new content, right? So like the new Top Gun movie, which I have not seen, but I heard it's like number one right now, is new content, right? Spider-Man Homecoming or Spider-Man No Way Home had Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield come back in. Spoiler warning, and if you don't already know, well, it's too late.
Well, yeah,
Um,
you said it. You said the spoiler warning after the spoiling, and
yeah,
that's
but
not how
if you
that
haven't
works.
watched the movie by now, are you really a huge fan? Let's
Are
be
you even a
real.
Spider-Man fan?
Yeah.
Do you
But
see that that's going back into theaters?
oh, I did not know, but it makes
The
sense.
more fun stuff edition, they're gonna add in a bunch of deleted scenes or whatever.
Oh, that's fun. That's
Yeah,
fun.
I'm not gonna see it in theaters, but it's cool.
It's fun. But yeah, anyways, that's new content, right? While these remakes, a lot of the times, they'll add like little quality of life gameplay features, but it's not a lot of new content. The same story that we've already played. And it makes it where it just doesn't justify making a whole new game in versus like making a sequel, right? Like how much cooler would it be to have The Last of Us 3 versus having The Last of Us
Well, I don't
remake?
know. Everyone hated The Last of Us 2, right?
That's true. And if you hadn't seen Last of Us 2, you can watch the playthrough on our channel, which according to the views, I think everyone hated on our channel too.
I actually don't hate that game. Like, and it's not. I don't care about the story, honestly. Joel dying totally doesn't bother me because
Spoiler warning.
he completely deserved it. But like, I think that game's fun. But
Mhm.
that also comes to like, this is completely unrelated. But like, the problem with that game in my eyes, the biggest issue is that it's so much fun, the combat and the killing people, that it goes directly against the message of the game in a very glaring way. But I still had fun with it. But
Yeah.
okay, so back to the actual topic. What do you think? What remake would you point to and be like, yeah, that doesn't really? Why are we doing this? Because
Yeah,
like I
I
know it's
mean,
not out yet, but I feel like The Last of Us just doesn't make sense.
yeah, it screams that. And I mean, and to your point on the Dead Space video, I think that also screams it. Um,
I think to a lesser degree than Last of Us.
oh no, agreed, because Dead Space came out so much longer ago, and there was Dead Space 2 and Dead Space
Well,
3,
that's
but
the
like,
thing. There's only a 5 year difference, but I
right,
think like even in the course of that, because it's like Dead Space came out at the beginning of like the that generation, the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation, and then The Last of Us came out right at the end. So
mhm,
like you can kind of see even like between those two games how much games improved over those 5 years. And like while Dead Space, like I said in my video, doesn't need a remake, I feel like it deserves one more than The Last of Us because there's a lot of gameplay elements that are introduced in the sequels that are better. I think the sequels for Dead Space play better than the first Dead Space in terms of gameplay. And I think that's one of the things that makes it worth it. And like I mentioned in the video, Isaac being voice acted is huge for me personally
sure,
because like that makes sense. Like it doesn't make sense that he didn't talk in the first game. As far as I know, The Last of Us doesn't really have anything that's really being added besides like graphic fidelity or whatever. You know what I mean?
sure, I get that, but my problem is so even with Dead Space, what they're adding, like, yeah, like hardcore fans like yourself are probably going to go back and play it. And you know, new people who have never played Dead Space before, they'll love the remake, right? They'll be able to go to it and be able to enjoy it. But the hard thing is how much better as a hardcore fan of Dead Space would it have been to get Dead Space 4? You know, and it's been a while since Dead Space 3 came out. And so instead of putting our time and energy on a remake that, as you said in your video, translates really well still, like we don't need a remake, just
Very true.
be able to port it to the new systems. You know, we
Oh
don't
yeah,
need
I'd
to
stand by that 100%.
yeah,
They
we
should
don't need
have
to
done
reinvent
the
the
Mass
wheel
Effect
here.
thing for Dead Space.
Yeah,
Like the gameplay improvements I'm talking about, I don't think it would have been that hard to implement them in like the OG Dead Space if you just remastered it.
sure,
Because like they changed the gameplay of the first Mass Effect and the Legendary Edition to be closer to the later games. It's not a complete overhaul, but
right,
it's fixed. It's better than it was, I guess you could say. And they
right.
could have done that with Dead Space to the same effect.
No,
I think it would have
exactly.
been harder to add Isaac voice acting back in, but even then, like a remaster, I think that would have been totally doable. It would have
Yeah.
been cheaper too.
Well, yeah, and honestly, I mean, as cool as that is to add the voice back in there, and it, you know, that maybe is a point that makes it where you want to replay the new version, so you have that new content. Like that's the reason why you're playing it, so you get new content. And how much better would it be just to get a whole new game itself versus playing through a game that you would play through again originally, you know what I mean, because you like it so much. But a lot of people who do play video games, there are so many games out there. I seriously, I have so many video games on my list of to do that if there's not enough difference between a remake, I'm not going to play that remake, you know, unless I was a hardcore fan. It's really hard to justify playing a game that I've already played again unless I like absolutely love it versus like starting a new game, because there are so
Yeah.
many games out there that nobody hardly has the time to be able to play all these new games that come out.
Yeah, I totally agree. Plus, I think well, I'll skip ahead a little bit to one of the later questions, but like, should remakes be like a full priced thing? The
No,
Last of Us, because it's a PS5 game, the remake is going for $70
it's crazy.
when you can get the remaster that came out in 2014 and you can play on the PS4, which means you can play it on the PS5. You can get that for $20
It's crazy.
and it's the same game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and especially even with like, you know, they talk about how visual qualities will go up, right? And it'll look so much better. And it really utilizes the next gen console. Well, the problem is you also have to have a TV that lets you see that difference. And honestly, like, you know, a lot of people do have like a 4K TV nowadays, but it's the amount of hertz that comes through on that for your motion rate. And most people's TVs nowadays, they've been made to be where it gives you about 60 hertz. on that, and that doesn't even give you the full capability then of what the PS5 does. And so it literally does not even justify getting it on like the PlayStation 5 versus playing just the PlayStation 4 version, the remaster like you just referenced. And so
Yeah.
it literally makes zero sense. Like I think The Last of
The
Us and
Last
that
of
being
Us
a
one,
huge reveal was such a letdown.
and like I don't know, it feels cash grabby. The Last of Us one more so than the Dead Space one because I feel like Dead Space it was a dead franchise after Dead Space 3. Like no, but like the team that was working on it, the developers, they got shut down. Visceral Games completely shut down. There was no talk of Dead Space for however many years. And they're like, okay, well maybe I can kind of get where they think like, oh, let's bring back Dead Space, but let's do a remake. Let's start fresh. I can kind of understand. I think the original games are good enough that that's not really needed, but I can understand the thinking. The Last of Us isn't a dead franchise. Last of Us 2 came out what, a year or two ago?
Yeah.
And like it's still being talked about. People like still talk about it. They have a Last of Us TV show coming out sometime this or next year. And like they're probably working on a Last of Us Part 3. Like as much as people hated it, Last of Us Part 2, I'm still pretty sure it was a financial success. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like it just doesn't why a remake of something that's not even 10 years old? That game is like 8 years old.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, and again, because the remaster too, like that is
It's yeah,
crazy.
exactly.
That is crazy.
I think one of the another benefit of like the Dead Space remake and like it's just I want a Dead Space I can play on my PS5. And like with the new PlayStation Plus model where like they're doing like you can put classic games on it. I'm sure at some point they'll add Dead Space in there. It's already on Xbox Game Pass, and that's what PlayStation is trying to replicate. So at some point I'll probably be able to play Dead Space on my PS5. So I don't know what my point was. I guess it doesn't make sense at that point.
That's what I'm saying. And I going back to your questions here, can remakes actually be better than the original?
Oh yes,
I
I believe so.
Yeah, I believe so too. I believe so too.
Because like
Tell me
the
your
biggest
thoughts.
one for me is Resident Evil 2, and I know the original is a classic, but it plays like absolute garbage. The tank controls are terrible. The fixed cameras or whatever, that's cool. I think there is something to be said about that. But like the gameplay sucks. The graphics, it's a 1998 game, so they haven't aged really well. And I think the remake is better. It looks better, it plays better, it sounds better. I think it's funner. I've played both the original and the remake, and that's just what I don't know. Maybe I do probably have a bias because Resident Evil 2 was my first game in that series, but I do think it is better.
Well, I think that brings up a really good point. That remakes can be something that is amazing, but and honestly, with Resident Evil 2, I think that's a great example of they really did have to create almost an entirely new game. Yeah, they
Oh
had the
yeah,
same story and the same villains and stuff like that throughout it, but I mean the graphics are such night and day from 1998
well yeah, everything
to
had to
when
be
it came
built
out, and
brand
it's like
new mostly.
that's when it makes it a remake actually make sense, right? That's when a remake will actually be good because new players to Resident Evil, like myself, I had never played like the original. I now look at the new one and I think, oh my gosh, it's so fantastic! What a great game! But if I was playing The Last of Us PS4 edition, which I know we're hating a lot on The Last of Us, but that is just the new remake that was announced. Um, and if I was playing the PS4 version versus now playing the new PS5 version, what's going to make a difference? Am I going to really say, "Oh my gosh, this was so worth it. I'm so happy I played this game again"? Probably not.
Well, they're not even like I know it's not like the end of the world or whatever, but they're reusing all of the motion capture performances from the original game. So they're not really adding anything new in even that department. Like it really just seems like it's like a just another remaster, but like a step up, I guess. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, I think another one, I don't think it's better necessarily, but like it's also a really good game is the Final Fantasy VII remake. Because again, that game was originally released in 1997. It had aged terribly. Everybody looks like two polygons stuck together. And the remake is also doing something interesting with that game. Slight spoilers for that game, I guess. But they're following the story, but they're also diverting from it in a really interesting way. Like they're retelling the story while adding a whole new element to it. Or I think in the future, because like they're splitting the remake up into like 2 or 3 games, I think. The future couple games in the remake of the Final Fantasy series, I don't think they're gonna follow the story like one to one because of the new, I'm not gonna say what exactly, but because of the new elements introduced in the story, it's gonna be a different experience story wise than the original game, which I think is a good way to do it because you still get like the remake, and you get to see a lot of the things and places and enemies and stuff from the original game, brand new, looking good, stuff like that. You get a lot of the same story beats, but it's different enough that old fans have something new to experience, and new fans can experience the greatness of the original. You know what I mean?
100%. And I think a great example of this is Persona 5 versus Persona 5 Royal, right? Persona 5 is a game that is amazing, just standalone, but Persona 5 Royal has more in new content, which is crazy to say that Persona 5 added more content, right? Like, this is a game that has so many hours and hours and hours of gameplay, and they added more to it, and that's what made it worth it to play Persona 5 Royal after already playing Persona 5, right? Now, if they would have just made everything look a little nicer, maybe added a quality of life improvement, it would have been really hard to justify purchasing Persona 5 Royal if it didn't have that new content, because that means you have to commit to play, 130-hour game again, right?
Yeah.
Um,
See,
and
I totally would though.
I mean,
I love Persona 5.
I do too, but I'm just bringing up another example of something where it's
Right.
like
Well,
they
that's
did
not
it
necessarily
correct
a
in the sense that they
remake, I
added
feel
more
like.
content. And that is where remakes can be good. One of the questions on the list is what makes good remakes. I think they can be good if you are continuing the story, right? And because a lot of games that are just standalone, right? Like they just have their standalone game. They don't usually, a lot of games don't have sequels. And so I think what can make a good remake is one, finding an older game, but two, continuing the story from that older game. Persona 5, most likely we will never be able to continue with these characters. Persona 6, they, with how the Persona games go, they usually switch characters up. And Royal gave us a chance to be able to look more into the characters' lives and stuff like that. It still had the, similar ending and similar beginning, but it let us look more into it and more content with our characters, because that's the reason we love these games, is because we connect with the stories, we connect with the characters. Um, and so that's where I think what makes a good remake is having new content, and also it either being old enough that you're actually getting a huge graphic update, um, or just adding that new storytelling capability.
Okay, let me run something by you. I wanted to get your opinion on this.
Sure.
The Spyro and Crash remakes that came out in 2017 and 2018. Do you think, because like again, it's one of those where the games were older, they were like PS1 games, and they got like a facelift, completely brand new. They look better, but keep like the style and sense of the originals. And then they also reintroduced interest into those franchises. You know what I mean? Like Crash Bandicoot got a fourth game because of the success of the Insane trilogy. More stuff like that should happen, right?
Agreed. I think again, Crash is a great example. I never played the Spyro games, so I can't really speak to those as much. But I have played both the original and the newer version of the Crash games. And I think it does make a difference because of the console gap, if that makes sense, the generation gap that those games had, as well as, I mean, as far as in the actual like graphics and stuff, and maybe I'm alone in this, it doesn't make a huge difference to me with a game like Crash, right? It's a animated Bandicoot, and so it doesn't make as much of a difference that, it has new and improved graphics with it. And I can see where like a game, to let The Last of Us credit, where it is based off humans, that the graphics matter so much more, right? It makes such a huge difference versus
It
it being
needs
kind
to
of
be
a cartoon.
realistic.
Yeah, exactly. It wants to be realistic. While Crash Bandicoot is farthest thing from realistic, and that's okay. But I think they kept the difficulty spike with Crash, which was incredible, and being able to play it. But to also the other side of it, and sorry, I'm kind of rambling here. You have but you have like all of these consoles are now like updating in a way that they want us to play their old games, right? Like they're bringing, for example, Nintendo, now you can play all N64 games now on their Nintendo subscription service, and PlayStation, like you said, they're changing it to be like Game Pass and going to be bringing in older versions of things, and Xbox already had it with their Game Pass. Like they're wanting us to play these old games and pay for their subscription, but then also these gaming companies are making remakes and expecting us to pay $70 for the remake.
Yeah,
That makes zero
dumb.
sense.
Yeah,
That makes zero sense.
I think like I don't know. It all comes down to like it's also just interesting, right? Because Resident Evil 4, in line with like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, is also getting a remake, and I think that's when the Resident Evil series is going to start towing the line between, okay, do we need a remake for this game? Because Resident Evil 4 is a really good game. Like, it's a lot of people's favorite in the series. It's a classic horror action game. And it maybe doesn't really need a remake, but it could also use one in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
it's right on that line. And it's interesting to me because the original Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dead Space only came out 3 years later in 2008. So, like, do you think those 3 years of difference really matter when it comes to like how much time needs to pass between a game and its remake for the remake to make sense? More so than like a remaster, because Resident Evil 4 has been remastered on every system and console ever.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's hard because years, just like calendar year, it's hard to say an exact number because, for example, like if you said, 3 years gap between the PS2 and the PS3, that is a big difference, right? Like that is a big difference of when that newer console, that next gen came out, and like PS2 games, if you go back and play versus PS3 games, I mean, there is a huge, honestly, difference in just the quality in those games, right? Now, if we're saying 3 years from when the PS4 first came out to 3 years after when the PS4 came out, not a huge difference,
Yeah.
Like, and so I think it's different in video game years, if that makes sense, and that's why I think each game has to be looked at differently than just doing, okay, it's okay to be able to make a remake now. Enough years have passed, and that's where it's like, to your point on the Dead Space video, it's like the Dead Space like game just translates so well. They did such a good job at the time. And
Right.
so that's why it doesn't necessarily need anything crazy. Now, The Last of Us is even worse because it has been made to in such a way that it was already realistic, good looking. Like it was their flagship, right? And then they remade it because they're like, oh, this is our flagship. We need to make it look really nice. Like, or they remastered
Well,
it. Sorry, not remake. But
I think they were just jumping on the remake train. Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah,
Resident Evil 2 isn't. It's not to blame for remakes. Remakes have been happening. Pokemon's been doing it every year for like a million years. They've remade Gen 1 like 3 or 4 different times.
sure.
But like, I think Resident Evil 2 was so successful when it came out as like a horror game too. And like people were like, "Oh man, this is breathing fresh life into the franchise. This is how remakes are done." And I think Dead Space and Last of Us both, I think, were inspired directly by the like Resident Evil 2 remakes, because like they're both horror games. They're both like kind of like over the shoulder shooters. Like they're a very similar game when you think about it. And I do wonder if like EA and PlayStation were like, okay, we need our own Resident Evil 2 remake, you know?
Sure. That makes sense. I mean, it's easy money, right?
Oh yeah. Well,
You take a
I
project
think
that's
that's
already
in theory.
done.
We'll see. We'll see how well Last of Us and Dead Space do. You know, because like, well, who are people actually going to pay full price for the Last of Us remake when you can just play the remaster?
Right. Well, honestly, what scares me with that is what happens if sales aren't good for the Dead Space remake, and all of a sudden, like, you know what, this franchise is dead,
and I'll cry.
You know what I mean? Like, what would happen there? Because like, if they try to use sales of the remake to see if these games should continue and get sequels, I would think that'd be a terrible mistake. And that's honestly what I'm really scared about, is if the remakes flop and financially it doesn't make sense, and they're like, oh, you know what, the fans just aren't into it as much anymore. It's like, well, no, it's because they already have the game.
Can play it, yeah.
Yeah, they have.
Make a new thing with that franchise.
Right. They don't want to pay $70 to play the same game again.
See, I'm a little concerned with Dead Space because I'm worried that, like, if it is successful, they're going to try to emulate Resident Evil more, and they're going to remake Dead Space 2, which needs it even less than Dead Space 1. Like, Dead Space 2 it's one of my favorite games of all time. It's my favorite in that series by far. It needs a remake even less. So, like, are they going to take the wrong lessons from Dead Space Remake if it is successful? They're like, oh, they want more remakes when people just want more Dead Space. Like, I think if Dead Space Remake is successful, they should make Dead Space 4.
Right.
But I'm worried they're going to be like, oh, okay, Dead Space 2 Remake. We're going to do all 3 games. Don't do that.
One, I think that makes a really good point so Mass Effect, I think, gave us a great example on how to be able to do a remake correctly. And you mentioned this in your Dead Space video. But the Legendary Edition, where they have all 3 games, like, that was huge, right? Because there were so many quality of life things that they did from game 1 versus game 3. And they brought all of that into the Legendary Edition, where you have Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 that you can play. But they all came out together. And that justified paying the amount of a remake, because you're getting 3 games.
3 games. Like, 3 big, like, they're pretty long games. And, like, they have a lot to do in those games. And yeah, no, I stand by that fully. Like, I think they should have done that with, and like, even like the Crash Bandicoot and Spyro Reignited, they kind of do a similar thing. Like, those are remakes versus a remaster, but still, like, it's 3 games being remade in one package compared to, like, 1 game being remade.
Still there?
Oh, did you lose me for a second? Max?
Yeah, sorry, I lost you there for a little bit.
Cool. Did you hear what I said, though?
I just heard those are 3 games, and then you cut out.
Yeah, okay. Well, Crash and Spyro, those are 3 games completely remade and put together as one new game.
Right.
And that's more bang for your buck in a lot of ways. People are going to be like, oh, wow, that's 3 great games being remade and sold together versus, oh, it's 1 game that's like, because, like, Dead Space isn't a long game. I can beat Dead Space in, like, 5 hours.
Sure.
If even that, like, at this point. Depends on how much I pay attention to the story and whatever. But, like, Dead Space, the remake, presumably isn't going to be much longer. And it's not offering, like, any kind of multiplayer or any kind of, like... One of the biggest criticisms I do have for Dead Space is I don't think there's a lot of replayability outside of, like, oh, I can try to get in on a harder difficulty or something. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like,
sure.
That's another thing going for Mass Effect is, like, it's just... There's so much replayability because of the choice system, and you can have your character be set up a different way each time you play. It's, I don't know. And, like, Spyro and Crash games, they offer a lot of challenges and, like, time trials and bonus stuff. Just, like, The Last of Us and Dead Space aren't going to have that because they're not that kind of game.
Right. Well, and I think you made a good point earlier in this video too, that, like, the Crash game, for example, when it came out, it set up the next Crash sequel. Mass Effect, when it's come out, has now set up the next Mass Effect sequel.
Yeah,
and it's gotten
people will be able to replay those games before the new one.
Exactly, because it got old and new fans back into it, right?
Exactly.
And it's going to make sales better for the new game when it comes out. It just will. So if they would have done that with Dead Space, for example, 1, 2, and 3 all coming out with the remake, I think that would have made the next Dead Space sequel sell so much more. Now, if this remake doesn't do well, because it's just the first game, who knows what's going to happen, right?
Well, that's what I mean, too. Like, I think just, like, from a business perspective, too, it makes more sense to do a remaster because it's cheaper. You're not remaking, you're not redeveloping a whole game. You're slapping a fresh coat of paint on it, changing some gameplay. And I'm not trying to minimize that is still hard work, but it's just logistically cheaper and easier than a full remake.
Right.
And, like, you could just do that for Dead Space. And, like, I think, like, for something like Dead Space, that it has been, I think Dead Space 3 came out in, like, 2013 or something, and there hasn't been anything new since. I think a remaster would have been a more logical first step in reviving the franchise than a full-blown remake. because you can spend less. It's less risky. You know what I mean? Like if this Dead Space game flops, how much money is EA gonna lose on that
Right.
compared to if it's a remaster where they put less into it, but could potentially like garner new interest in the series or whatever. Like that's kind of what they're trying to do anyway.
Yeah. It's a
It
little
doesn't make
nerve
a lot of
wracking to
sense.
be honest. It is. It is. It's crazy because we don't know what these developers are going to do when most likely these remakes won't do well, right?
Right.
And that's a really sad future for I think video games in general.
Oh yeah. I think even like the Resident Evil remakes aren't completely free from this. Like Resident Evil 2 remake, I stand by as being great. It's fully remade. There's replayability. There's bonus challenges. There is stuff to do after you beat the main game. Resident Evil 3, however, really doesn't have any of that. Like it's the main story, which is significantly shorter than Dead Space 2. And like you can beat that game in under 2 hours.
Sure.
And then what? Like I guess there's like little challenges you can get to unlock concept art and whatever, but it's not fun.
Right.
Looking back on Dead Space 3 remake, I kind of regret paying full price for that game. Like I don't think if I could go back, I don't think I would
Mm-hmm.
because it's just not really a full game. And
No.
like that's like I don't think that'll be the case with Dead Space 4 because there's already a lot of game in Dead Space 4 that even if they just take what was already in the game and just put in this new game, it'll still for the most part be worth it because there's enough there. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, not even they're safe.
What did he say?
And not even like Dead Space or not even Resident Evil is like completely safe from I think unnecessary or kind of lackluster remakes, I guess you could say. Because like I think remake Resident Evil 3 deserved a remake, but they should have done more with it. I think.
Sure. Sure. Well, I think it shows just a lack of creativity with a lot of
Yeah.
these video game developers. It's one thing to say we're gonna make a sequel on a story that already was successful, and it's like okay, I mean, like they still have to come up with a new story and everything like that, but they're not coming up with a whole new characters and a whole new like background and everything like that. It's another thing to say we're just gonna remake the same game, not change any of the story, keep everything the exact like. There's no creativity really in that, except for maybe seeing reviews and saying, "Oh, you know what? We should have made it where it was easier to pick up ammo." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It feels very lazy by game developers in general because like there needs to be more creativity. Like that's why indie games are on such a rise because
Well, I
there's
also
so
wouldn't
much
put it
creativity in them.
solely on developers. For the
Right.
record, I think it's a lot of it's publisher demand. I made that bit in the video, but I do think that team didn't decide that they were going to make a Dead Space remake. EA told them to make a Dead Space remake,
Sure.
and they're just doing what they're like. I don't think you can really put that on the developers for lack of creativity because they're just doing what's asked of them by their publisher.
Sure. I guess
And
there's
like I
just
think
creative
Last of
integrity,
Us,
right?
I don't know if Last of Us can be the same thing. I could kind of see them, the like Naughty Dog being a bit full of themselves and be like, oh yeah, we can remake Last of Us 1. Pfft, easy. I don't know if it was a PlayStation or a Naughty Dog thing. Dead Space, I'm positive it was an EA thing because it's EA. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at the Madden games; they're just the same thing over and over again.
And I don't understand because like EA did Mass Effect Legendary Edition, so like why didn't they do the same thing with Dead Space? I don't know. EA doesn't. EA's they're bad all the time.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, you have any more thoughts on this?
I do think it's interesting that like this is kind of a random little tangent. I do think it's interesting that as the generations go and as games improve, there's less to improve upon. Like a PS4 game and a PS5 game, I feel like the differences are going to be less significant than like a PS2 and a PS3 game. You know what I
Right.
mean? Or
Right.
even a PS2 to like PS1. Like the generation gaps and differences and improvements, well, they're still there, obviously, like 4K and higher frame rates and whatever and ray tracing. But like I think most people probably don't care about that.
Mhm.
Like casual gamers probably don't care.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like I just think it's interesting that like because I think that's part of the reason why some like the Last of Us remake feels more unnecessary than the Dead Space remake, even though they were originally part of the same generation. Dead Space is still older, and it shows more than the Last of Us. And then like even like a step further, like Resident Evil 4, like 3 years before Dead Space. and it's a significant difference. You know what I mean? But that's not going to be the case going further. So when do they run out of stuff to remake? Because when are they going to start remaking PS4 games?
Right. It's probably going to happen sooner rather than later, which is sad.
Well, I mean, technically, Last of Us, the remaster, is a PS4 game, so it just doesn't. I don't know.
It's crazy.
Well, that was this video. Yeah, unless you have anything to add.
What did you say?
Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add. I do have this to add, though, which is you guys can add to us by liking, by commenting, and by subscribing. We really do appreciate all the love. I know we haven't been uploading as many videos, but we've been trying our hardest to come out with more exciting videos and more on-topic videos than just coming out with a ton of quantity, right? Quality over quantity.
Yep.
So please let us know.
Beat me to it.
What did you say?
I was going to say that, but you beat me to it.
Oh, well, yeah. So make sure to comment down below what you guys want to see. If there's anything in particular you guys want us to talk about. We've been really enjoying this, and we really appreciate all the love and support.
Yeah. Well, what Max said.
So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Oh, I almost died while you were giving your outro.